My name is Tamara Sakotis, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for PeaceJam Rocky Mountain. And I have the great pleasure of working with a wonderful leadership team whom I've invited to join me today and helping explore this topic. I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
My name is Meg Zimmerman, and I'm the International Studies Coordinator at DCIS at Fairmont, an elementary school in Denver, Colorado.
My name is Carolyn Dean, and I'm the Graduate Assistant at PeaceJam Rocky Mountain.
I'm Stephanie Mills, and I'm the sponsor of the PeaceJam Club at Thunder Ridge High School in Highlands Ranch, Colorado.
And I'm Debbie Reese. I was the sponsor for the past 10 years of the PeaceJam Club at Ponderosa High School in Douglas County.
And Debbie is Teacher of the Year with PeaceJam, so we're extra special honored to have her here. And great, so we'll start today with our agenda. You know where we're headed. We just did our welcome and introductions. We're going to explore the service learning framework. This framework actually is used across a variety of states and institutions, but this is the version we at PeaceJam have adopted. We're going to look at a project example and evaluate that example. And we'll talk a little bit about service learning and higher education and how what we're doing now in our classrooms really can support our young people as they go on to college and career. And then finally, we'll share some resources. Most of them are quite specific to the state of Colorado. Great. So what is service learning? I'll begin here and we can kind of chat about it, but service learning is a philosophy, a pedagogy, instructional strategy, and a model for community development that balances service to the community with student learning. Here we say, let's compare just volunteering at a soup kitchen, that's service, right? But researching and addressing one or more causes of homelessness is service learning. Reading to a group of challenged young readers is service. And then addressing the challenges that those young readers face, well, that's the service learning part. Have any of us ever had any experiences at all? I know some teachers have expressed that their students are always drawn towards the service component, and then it's really hard to tie in that focused learning.
Well, the other day in class, we were talking about what we could do just around the school to help out with, not with my PeaceJam group, but just a group of students I had. And we talked about cleaning up the parking lot. And I said, well, yeah, but we clean it up, but it gets messy again. What's the problem? Where do we find the problem? And the problem is that kids keep littering. So how do we solve that problem? And then that's when I think that the learning happens. We realize, there's a deeper problem here. And it's simple. It's just trash in our parking lot, but it still tells them, when you just clean up, you're not really solving the problem.
Great point. Great point. It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on an
Right.
issue. Perfect. So we're also going to talk a little bit about service learning and higher education. I had the pleasure of co-facilitating this workshop with Miss Lori McKinney from MSU Denver. She's the service learning director at that school, and she and I sit on the Colorado Service Learning Council together. She was able to bring in the voice of higher education, and I'm going to do my best to express her sentiments here. But she was talking about how higher education institutions now are really looking critically at experiential learning. And she used a couple of examples about certain schools here in Colorado, but also abroad, that are creating really robust internship experiences and apprenticeship experiences for high school students. So part of their credit is actually working in a variety of businesses or organizations in the community. And she's saying that this increases civic engagement, and that ultimately most schools these days are really factoring service learning experiences into the application process. Great, so we will kind of unpack each of these items, but just to give you an overview, we're going to talk about how you pick an issue, right? The investigation, how you make a plan, so that's the research and creating that plan collectively, taking action, so the actual doing of the project, which often folks like to hop straight into, and those earlier components can be overlooked. And then the reflection and evaluation, so referencing learning objectives and project goals, and then the demonstration and the celebration. Great, so we'll start with pick an issue. I think if it's great with everyone else here, I'll just read through this and then we talk a little bit maybe about how you and your experiences working with young people have selected an issue. So essentially this step is to guide students through an investigation of their community, right? So reading the news, looking at websites, using existing data, maybe, you know, the academic the information that comes from your school every year from tests, you know, where are you at? Are your students reading at grade level? If yes, awesome. If no, why, right? Taking community walks, looking around in their community, finding out what needs to be addressed, surveys, textbooks. Also remembering to inventory youth skills and interests, writing problem statements, right? Summarizing the issue with data and facts, and that problem statement really should be one clear statement. For example, the incidence of homelessness in the city of Lafayette has increased by 30% since 2015. I made that up, right? But that's a problem statement. It's just one sentence stating the facts. And then exploring the root causes of those issues. So, you know, you could volunteer and talk to the folks that are living in that community, or talk to local experts who run organizations that address that issue. Watch documentaries. TED Talks is always a favorite. And then get perspective. So it's our responsibility to ensure that we're getting our information from diverse sources. So can any of you speak a little bit to perhaps how maybe you've selected an issue with your students?
This is Debbie Reese from Ponderosa. I know that when we first started back in 2006, I had the kids go over the global call to action after we had come to a conference for them to be able to decide, you know, what kind of a service learning project they wanted to do. And I think, you know, sometimes kids get really intimidated by the root cause and the research, and they try to make service learning more complicated than it really has to be. And the kids at Ponderosa initially decided to make Ponderosa their community, because most of them spend more time in the school than they do at home on any given day. If they're involved in sports or an after school club, you know, some of them are there from 7 in the morning until 5 o'clock at night. And then they decided to start with recycling, because we didn't recycle anything at school. And, you know, when they're looking at that, they tried to make it so complicated about what the root cause was. And I said, well, you know, it could be as simple as people might want to recycle, but we don't have any recycling bins, and we don't have any place to put it, you know, which is just very simple. So those were, you know, two things that we needed to solve right off the bat. And we did it with fruit boxes from the grocery store without spending any money, and putting them in the classroom. And then part of our weekly meetings was collecting the recycling and taking it out to the bins. So, you know, I mean, they were certainly learning, and we put up posters about what could and couldn't be recycled. But, you know, I think as sponsors, it helps if you try to help them see that it doesn't have to be super complicated, so that they don't get intimidated by answering, you know, all the questions and making it seem so scary, like they think I don't have the answer. And I said, but you know, the answer can be pretty simple. There's no place to put it. I mean, that's right. That's really why we weren't doing it. So.
And I think you make a good point, like, you know, have the students define their community, you know, where are they working? In your case, it's the school that they're defining their community. I think oftentimes, you know, the word community is so big,
right.
broad, that students can get overwhelmed.
Right, so. Right. And everybody's community is different.
Yeah.
So if they could, you know, find a common community that they can all address, that makes it easier.
Definitely. And I think too, what's great about that is it starts very simple, but that will often lead to a much larger project, which we can talk about perhaps on a later slide. But, you know, identifying what you can address right now, and then once you get to that evaluation piece and assessment piece, understanding your impact and knowing where you can go with it next. Great. So then once you've identified your issue, you really need to make a plan. So brainstorm and discuss what can be done to address the root cause of the issue. So you're going to identify learning goals and outcomes. And I'd like to drive this point home, because if academic teachers are opting to use service learning in their traditional classrooms, I always make the case that be very explicit about what you're required to teach. What is the objective? And explain that we really can't go in any direction that doesn't ensure we meet this objective, right? The more explicit we are with our students, and I've done it with the elementary grades, the more they understand the process and the requirements. So who are the decision makers and the stakeholders that are connected with the issue? It's really important. Are there nonprofit organizations? Is your principal the one that makes the decision, or does it go all the way up to the superintendent, right? So identifying stakeholders is critical. What's already been tried? What's being done already? You don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? What can you add as a community to helping solve a problem and not waste your time with things that have already been done? Assess what your group can feasibly do. Feasibility is huge. It's huge, right? Again, I think this kind of brings back the point Debbie was making, addressing recycling. You could do that year, right? But your big project would have been much too much, I think, for everyone to kind of digest at the onset. And then write up your plan and consider logistics. And I'll often have the little ones and even the older ones initial next to the plan if they have their responsibility. So it's kind of like a little contract that we have an agreement with each other that says we're going to do this collaboratively and together.
So at Thunder Ridge, we saw a problem with bullying, which is a theme we've heard a lot. And we started off by going to the middle school and doing an anti-bullying program that one of my students designed around this whole make a plan sort of issue. And we found that the middle school students were sort of resistant. They had gotten to a point where they were already sort of jaded, and we felt like we needed to go younger and start earlier. So we actually, here it says, what is already being tried or being done. The Rotary had a program that they'd started at another elementary school with another group of high school kids called the Peaceful Schools program. And now we're really involved in that, and the kids go once a month to the second grade classes and read books about how to express your feelings without hurting feelings. And so we got younger, and we really feel like they love the high school kids. They really respond to the high school kids, and we think we're making a difference. We've been, the Rotary does some pre and post surveys. We've gotten a lot of good feedback. And then when you say consider what you can feasibly do, last year we started with 2 elementary schools with this, and it was too hard. We didn't have enough students, and now we're just focusing on the 1 elementary school, and it's a really good fit for us, and then we're spreading it up to first grade and second grade. So we'll maybe just focus on the 1 for now and make the program grow, and then somebody else may see it, spread that around. So that sort of follows through on the things that you're saying here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Meg, I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit, because your students are incredibly engaged in projects. And how do you get that? How do you get them hooked, so to speak? And what place do they play in the creation of a plan?
So I think that as an elementary level club and PeaceJam organization, this slide seems a little bit lofty, but just to connect it back to the other slide, I think if you're playing off of your students' interests and letting them pick the project, they already know the answers to a lot of these questions. If you pick the project as the teacher, this plan is going to be a lot more, it's going to be a lot harder to make, and it's going to fall on you as the teacher. But if you're choosing something that's within the student's interest, they're going to know the answers to these questions. So I think that's where we start, is what are the kids interested in, and then they usually are able to take it from there if they're really interested in that topic.
Mm-hmm. I like to add, Cody Buchanan from CDE once said in a workshop that we led, that we as the educators are kind of like the bumpers on the bowling alley, right? And I kind of feel that sentiment when you say let the students select the project. What are they interested in? And then you just guide them through the learning, and you're not really the driving force, right? You're just keeping them out of the gutter,
Yeah.
really. Yeah, so I like that analogy. Great, thank you. So this is a template that we use at PeaceJam. It's in all of our curriculum. Generally, it's back toward the back when it's really about service learning and the projects and what the tools are that we offer. So I just want to visit it really quickly. These are the 4 quadrants, if you will, of helping select a a project based on student interest, right? So the top left corner says interests and or things that you like to do or you want to learn, which is kind of a fun one too. You might have students that are inclined musically but have never ever thought to pick up a guitar. So you know, that's the desire itself, I think, is adequate. Then the top right, issues that are of importance to you or of concern. And then skills and expertise that you are willing to share. I would also like to add that to include the community, the family, the broader community of the students, particularly with the little ones. If you're going to do a gardening project, for example, and one of the dads or moms works with a landscaping company or a landscape architecture company, bringing those people in as experts, it does a lot of things. I think it informs the project for sure. It develops a great sense of pride in the students who are bringing their dad or their uncle or their sister in. And it also strengthens that tie between home and school, right? So the parents know what the kids are learning in school and are invested in it. So so assessing the expertise of the larger family or community is helpful. And then groups you are involved with or you belong to. So if your students are involved in a faith-based organization that has a big soup kitchen holiday event, or you know, how can you, you know, decide depending upon what your issue area is, how can you tap into efforts already kind of in motion in the larger groups?
And we actually use this, and we changed that last one, the groups you are involved with, to things you do outside of school. I think, especially for our little ones, that's a lot easier for them to understand. I think what we find is some of the interests they focus too much on the school side, and so that changing that verbiage a little bit pulls them out of the, oh, I like to do math or I like to read,
Oh, right.
and gets them thinking a little bit bigger picture. So just an idea if you're using this with little guys.
That's great. And you know, I met with a principal a couple of days ago, and she was trying to, you know, reflect on maybe where PeaceJam fits during the school day in her school, because they're interested in doing an after school thing, but they have a service team or group that meets like a lunch club, and she said they didn't have any framework really. They just all were givers, right? And so I'd like to add that, like, you know, as administrators or educators, when you're trying to consider where PeaceJam might fit in, there may already be clubs that are in motion and doing good, but that could use more resources or more insight or a framework. So yeah, so tapping into that, like in the school itself, is often a good reflection. One more resource here, and we'll maybe cruise through it. It's similar to the last one. Again, this is in our material. The top left circle are needs and issues in the community, right? Skills, interests, and assets. So these are really the three components to making a decision as what your project is going to be about. And then that bottom one is the one I always drive home again, learning or project goals, right? As an educator, you have to identify what they're going to learn. You know, this semester I am required to teach you measurement, right? By the end of the semester, this class needs to understand the difference between the metric system and you know, systems of measurement. As soon as you lay that out there, it's going to drive the project one direction or another, right? But it also doesn't have to be like academic learning goals. If this is being done in a community center, for example, maybe the goal is to strengthen our community, you know. And then the take action piece, keeping records and collecting data, journals, photographs, observations, interviews, surveys. They seem pretty obvious to me, but I think really documentation is critical. And I'm a grant writer, so I always drive the point home that if you want to be funded again, you have to show them where their money went the last time or what they would be funding in the future, right? So impact data, photographs, don't forget it, these pictures with these little ones over here, grantors just eat it up. They are really excited to see these action pieces with the students. But beyond that, can maybe any of you share? I'd love to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the projects that you've done and what those action pieces might have looked like.
So I can talk about One we did, it's actually photographed here. Our kiddos did a drive for refugees new to Colorado specifically, and they worked with an organization that gave them the lists of what they needed, and then tapped into our community. So Tamara mentioned it earlier, but we relied really heavily on our families and our school community, and our parents who had some specific expertise around these things. So they did this drive for the refugees, and then were able to put together boxes in the way that the organization asked them to, and they actually worked with older students from other Peace Jam clubs to help them do this. And I think just to speak on the photographs part, I actually had kids coming up to me asking me to print them photographs of what they did. So not only do grant writers and other and adults really love it, but the kids also really love to have the pictures.
Great. I think collecting data is important, especially when you're doing something like you with recycling, and so you can sort of show the kids the impact of what they've done. Last year we did a waste audit at our school because we wanted to do something similar, not but we really would like to get composting going, and so we went and emptied a bunch of trash out in the back of the school and weighed it all and measured it all, and then that was a pre and then a post, and they saw that there was a change in the waste stream and where it was going. So that's proof to them. And if we wanted to write a grant at some point, we had the data to show, see, we've done this, and we can do more if we have, more support.
Absolutely. Great. So a couple of little tips here on taking action. It's really critical that we involve the community, right? So it's the idea of giving them an active role and being sure to do the project with them and not for them. I think sometimes when that happens, when we're doing it for them, it's because we really didn't do our community assessment. There's a lot of times where folks think there's a problem in a community, or maybe it's not even their community, right? Maybe it's a neighboring community and they think something needs to be fixed when in fact it's not perceived to be a problem in that community. And so therefore nothing will ever be sustainable unless there's the community buy-in. Ensuring that youth lead the project and make the decisions, I think is what Meg was speaking to a little bit before. That's the engagement piece, that's the hook. And then documenting the actions with photos and video journaling, etc. Are there any other thoughts on any of that? I think I can't drive the point home enough about involving whoever that community is.
I know that we found at Ponderosa when we started the recycling project, and I mean, this seems very, very simple, but we learned very quickly that once we supplied the recycling containers in each room and we put up posters about what could and couldn't be recycled, we thought, to keep this moving, we will be the ones who take out the recycling. And then, we quickly learned that number one, we couldn't do anything else during our weekly meetings because there was so much recycling. It took us an entire 2 hours, which we met every Monday from 3 to 5, to take it all out of the school. And then, going in and out, emptying it, going around to the classrooms, and I'd have to email teachers and tell them, please leave it outside their classrooms when school's out. And then, we got a couple months down the road, and I thought, this is crazy. Like, there's nothing magic about us taking this out. Like, you have the recycling, you have 30 kids, different kids, 5, 6 classes a day. But it took us an entire year to be able to, get the teachers to take ownership for their own recycling. So sometimes it is really hard. I would get emails actually from teachers who would say, could you have one of your kids please come take our recycling out? And I would think, good grief, like we put all this in place and, it takes you 5 minutes to run out to the recycling dumpster. So, it's hard to change the way people do things whenever you introduce something new. Another really simple thing, at our mailbox, at our teacher mailboxes, there was always a slot that was marked trash that had a bin under it. And I thought, if teachers are standing here sorting mail, the only things in their hands are mail and it can all be recycled. But people, and there was a recycling container right next to it, but people would continue to throw stuff in the trash hole instead of putting it like in the recycling bin. So I covered it so they couldn't put it in there anymore. And then they put it all there. But you know, it's just, it's
Those are
really,
logistics.
they really are.
Yeah.
It's really
But
hard
it's
to
changing
change.
a culture too.
Right,
Yes.
it's changing a
the way
culture. They're
people
not
behave.
right. They're not
You
used
know?
to doing it.
Yep. I think that this speaks to the feasibility piece, right? It's not feasible to have all the kids taking out the
It
recycling every
wasn't. I
meeting.
mean, they were like, well, when do we do anything else? Like, this is all we're doing.
Yep.
And I said, well, it's got to change. And so then, you know, I went to administration and said, look, I mean, this is not rocket science. This is
Recycling.
recycling. That anybody and you know, snag a kid that doesn't have a class that's walking past your classroom and ask them to take it out. You know, and it was hard to change it, but once administration came in and said, look, you're all responsible for your own.
That's great. And I think though what Stephanie says is true. It is changing the culture of
Mhm.
things. Once something's been done a certain way for
Yes.
so long. And I think also the idea of us participating in this change, like expecting slowly anyway, but everyone step up and participate. I mean, you can look at it in the macro, right? Our civic participation in our government. There are repercussions when people don't participate, as we know. And so changing the culture of our society is really important. We have to get everyone engaged and, you know, taking
Absolutely.
action.
Well, and I think just to speak on the involving the community a little bit, I think it's really important to involve every community that you're working with. So you might be one classroom or one club, but you can involve your whole school community and then whatever community you're working with for the project. So then
Right.
you're really fusing two communities and getting everyone involved, even if it came out of the idea of, you know, a group of 10 kids.
Well said.
Right.
Right on. Great. So this reflect and evaluate is often something that can be overlooked, I think. I mean, I do believe teachers are more mindful of that evaluation process than others. But there are a lot of community groups that engage in a service learning project, and once the project is done, it's like, you know, kind of like I feel at the end of a conference, right? But really, this is an important time to reflect on what was accomplished and how your goals make a lasting difference. So thinking, writing, and talking about accomplishments and challenges, making connections to learning objectives, right? So reflecting, you know, this semester we were supposed to learn about the metric system. Did that happen, right? Determining if you've met your goals and doing that with youth, of course. Assessing your impact based on data. I think Stephanie was speaking to that a little bit earlier, right? So understanding that before a project, this was the data, this is the information, and after a project, it changed to this. That's measurable, right? Reflecting on potential long-term impact, and then brainstorm creative and diverse ways to take the project further. I can't help but think, you know, you've been talking about recycling, Debbie, but your project actually started with recycling, but it got so much bigger and went so
Right.
much further.
Right.
So maybe you could speak a little bit to this reflect and evaluate and how perhaps it informed your long-term vision.
Yeah, so we actually worked with the energy manager from the school district when we did the recycling because we were trying to see, you know, how much of an impact it made, and he in turn contacted Waste Management, who could tell when they were collecting the recycling how much, you know, it was how much we were recycling compared to what we were doing before, and we had reduced our waste stream by like 75%.
Wow.
And so